Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Recreation Grants Local Park Program public input session for our rule changes. We're going to wait a few more minutes to get started, just see if there's any stragglers who want to join in. For those of you who are already connected, we have you all muted. You should see a chat area. You can give us questions as we go, but we're going to only address those in certain breaks as we go forward, just to keep it moving along. I also want to point your attention to the 3 handouts that we have attached to this presentation. We have the public meeting presentation, then we have 2 PDFs. One is called the Local Park Proposed Scoring Rubric, and one is the Local Park Score Sheet. You might want to pull those up and have those to reference as we're going on. We have an interesting noise happening here, I think, as more of you are joining. Just going to get that taken care of quickly. All right, thanks folks for bearing with us. So again, welcome, and we'll get started, and just really thank you for taking your time out of your day. We really do value your feedback and your time. So as you see here on the slide handouts, those are those that we have attached to this meeting. You'll also see a link to an online survey. The online survey will track with this presentation. So if you would like to provide your feedback as you're going, you've already taken this time out of your day, you know, we would encourage you to do that. You can also take it later. And we're going to have someone put a link in the chat box for you if you'd like to open that up right now. So who are we? Hi, I'm Susan. I'm the Local Park Grant Coordinator. Starting you out today. We have in the room Aaron Fryer and Dan Reese, other grant coordinators, and we'll kind of be taking turns going through this so you don't have to listen to my voice for 2 hours straight. We do have our Director of the Recreation Grants in the room here too, Dana Lagarde. So. And a few others here. So this is our contact information, and we do try to be as available as we can to you. We really like to be able to answer your questions. If you have questions that are not addressed in this presentation, please do feel free to contact us. So today's meeting has a few objectives. First, we're going to give you an overview of the program. Then we're going to review concerns that we've identified through both public input and staff observations on the scoring rules and administrative procedures related to the administration of our program. We're then going to present you with some draft evaluation criteria and rule changes that address these concerns that we've identified. And most importantly, we would love to obtain some verbal and written feedback regarding those proposed changes. That's the link to that survey, and you can provide us with more personal questions directly to our emails as well. So to just give you a basic overview of what we're doing and why we're doing it, we wanted to show you the TPWD goals. There are 4 of these that we have tried to sort of use as the bedrock of what we do in our programming here. So the first is to practice, encourage, and enable science-based stewardship of natural and cultural resources. The second is to increase access to and participation in the outdoors. The third is to educate, inform, and engage Texas citizens in support of conservation and recreation. And the fourth is to employ efficient, sustainable, and sound business practices. We also have 5 core values, and these are taken from the Diversity and Inclusion Plan of Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And we've created this new set of scoring criteria through these 5 values, and we're hoping that these are coming through in each and every one of those. And that is excellence, integrity, service, stewardship, and teamwork. And I'm going to pass this off to my colleague Aaron, and
right.
Here we go.
Oh, it says the slides aren't changing.
Oh. Can you guys see the screen now? Okay. Well, let me just back up a few slides for you. This is our contact information. This slide is part of the 2019 public meeting presentation that you can download, so you'll be able to get our emails there. You heard the meeting objectives. You heard me talk about this. So now we'll give you over to Aaron.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there with us. We're going to get this figured out, but we're going to go ahead and move forward and just give an overview of the local park grant program. Many of you probably have experience with our program from the past, but for those that may be new or maybe haven't written a grant for us before, we're going to kind of go through the general overview of our program. So first off, our grants, they are for acquisition and development of public park and recreational facilities. We are a matching grant, 50-50 match. So it's a reimbursement as well. So you have to spend the monies first, and then we can reimburse up to 50% of that. And then the main kicker is that any lands or any parks that we work and get funding from our local park grant program has to be dedicated as parkland in perpetuity, and it has to be properly maintained and open to the public. So the general overview. And then within our program, we actually have 5 grant opportunities. And so we're just going to go over those real quickly. Small community grant is for communities that have less than 20,000 population, and the maximum grant request can be $75,000. So going back with the 50-50 match, that means the total project cost would have to be at least $150,000 in order to receive that $75,000 back as a reimbursement. Now we have our non-urban program. We have an outdoor and an indoor. Those are for communities that are less than 500,000, and the grant request can go up to $500,000. And just a quick note, anybody that's in the small community, they can also apply for the non-urban outdoor grants if they would like to go for a bigger project and they have the resources to have a bigger project and they need more grant funds. Now the indoor program, it can go up to non-urban indoor program can go up to $750,000 as a reimbursement. Finally, we have our urban program. Again, we have another outdoor and an indoor grant. Those are for communities that are greater than 500,000, and those are strictly for those communities. So non-urbans cannot apply for an urban grant. That's strictly for our larger communities, and our maximum grant request is $1 million for those. And at any time, if you have questions, and y'all please type in, and we'll try to get to them as we can. Eligible applicants. So really, it's any political subdivisions of the state of Texas that have the responsibility for providing public recreation services to citizens. So again, cities, counties, river authorities, municipal utility districts, and really has to be in their bylaws that they provide public recreation services. That my section here. Oh, what funding sources real quick. Okay, so funding sources, we get our funding from the state sales tax on sporting goods. So that's any kind of sporting good items, basketballs, tennis rackets, bicycles, any kind of sporting goods. There's a tax that we get allocated through the local park grant program, and that goes into the Texas Recreation and Parks account, as well as the Texas Large County and Municipality Recreation and Parks account. Those are what we use for our state funding, and that's allocated through the legislature during session. And then we have federal funds as well from offshore gas royalties, and that all stems from the Land and Water Conservation Fund Act from 1964. So that's how we're funded, and a brief overview of our program. Again, if y'all have questions, y'all can jump on in. I'm going to pass over to Dan here. He's going to take it from here for a little bit.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. In addition to the local park manual, our program is also regulated by a number of other sources and documents. This includes Chapter 24 of the Texas Parks and Wildlife Code. It includes the Land and Water Conservation Fund, or LWCF Act, which was signed into legislation by President Johnson back in 1965. We also have the corresponding manual for the LWCF program. We have the Texas Outdoor Recreation Plan, or TORP. This is a document that is required for us to maintain our eligibility for federal LWCF funding. This document is prepared every 10 years, and we update it every 5 years. And the most recent update on the TORP was 2018. And then we have all of our grant requirements. These can be found in both 2 CFR 200, and then we also have the Texas Uniform Grant Management Standards. Many of you are probably familiar with both of those. In addition to all the things shown here, we also have multiple executive orders. We have Title IX of the Civil Rights Act, American with Disabilities Act, NEPA, and about 24 other various criteria. And the reason we mentioned all this and wanted to show you all these different sources is while we are gathering your feedback during this process and trying to make some positive changes to the local park program, a lot of the requirements that we follow are outside of our manual, and so really we don't have the ability to change those. Now we'll get into the eligibility criteria a little bit, and this is something that we would appreciate your feedback on. We'll start with both the small community and the 2 non-urban programs that Aaron mentioned earlier. Currently having 1 or more active grants does not prohibit you from applying for a new grant, provided that you meet the following criteria. One is that all grants that are at least 2 years in age or older must be a minimum of 50% reimbursed. And the second is that all unreimbursed funds for active grants cannot exceed $2 million. Again, this is for the small community and for the 2 non-urban programs. And we do encounter these on occasion, not frequently. But again, if you fall within the non-urban or small community program and you've found that your park planning efforts have run into these issues in the past, we'd love to hear from you. And then we have the eligibility criteria for our urban program. This is for both the urban indoor and the urban outdoor. The numbers are a little different here, just primarily due to the higher award ceiling. To maintain eligibility in the urban programs, all active grants must be at least 25% reimbursed, and that's all active grants that are at least 2 years in age or older. And then your total unreimbursed amount cannot exceed $4 million. Again, the urban award ceilings are a little higher. Frequently, the urban projects are on larger tracts of land. They have a larger, broader scope, and as a result, can take a little longer to get started. On occasion, there'll be environmental permitting required, so those are things that can kind of affect both of these criteria. If you're representing an urban, and there are about 16 total urbans throughout the state, and if you fall within this criteria or not, and you have input regarding this, we'd love to hear from you. So today's presentation webinar is part of an ongoing public input process, which started about a year ago when we were updating the TORP, the Texas Outdoor Recreation Plan. As part of the update efforts on the TORP, we had a general population survey, which is done over the phone. And then we also had a park provider survey. We had a little over 2,700 total respondents on the general population survey and around 350 provider survey results. We're asking some general questions regarding priorities and maintenance of and proximity of existing park facilities. We're also asking questions specific to the local park program. So as part of this public input process, we did get some pretty good feedback, and so I'll share some of that with you now. One of the main concerns we heard is that our current scoring criteria is overly complicated. We also heard that scoring should be more based on local needs with regards to renovation and acquisition and development of park facilities. One thing we heard is that there's currently no way for unique and innovative projects to score points. So we have seen some pretty interesting and innovative projects come in over the years that haven't been funded. So that is true. There's currently no scoring criteria associated with that. We heard that park attributes should be taken into consideration in design. And then we also heard on a few occasions that the small community grant ceiling, which is currently $75,000, should be raised a little bit. That number was established 7 or 8 years ago, and we all know $75,000 doesn't go quite as far as it did back then. And then we as staff, Aaron, Susan, and I, the current local park staff, we spend about 2 months out of the year with applications. So we spend about a month in individual review, and then about a month locked up in the conference room and committee review. And this is about every October and November of the year. So we spend a good amount of our time scoring and evaluating applications. So as a result of that, we've noticed a few things. One thing we've noticed is that site plans are being designed more in an effort to receive points as opposed to really addressing community need. Public input is a pretty big part of our program. We certainly encourage you to get your citizens involved early in the planning process. And so when we're scoring an application and we see that there was only one public hearing that took place and it was 2 or 3 weeks prior to the application deadline, that's something that indicates to us that maybe the public wasn't engaged, properly engaged, and wasn't involved early in the process. We also spend a fair amount of our time performing what we call post-completion inspections, and these are for previously fund-assisted sites. We currently have about 3,000 previously funded parks throughout the state of Texas, and we do go out and check them. So our goal is to check each park on a 5-year basis. So one thing we've noticed when performing these inspections so there is an increased number of compliance issues in previously funded parks, and these are due to poor operations, poor maintenance, and sometimes just a lack of resources. And then we don't have a lot of local park projects that do fail, but those that do, we do have some that do on occasion. And it's typically due to a lack of planning, lack of management resources, lack of experience in construction or grant management. And so that's definitely something that we're looking to address with this public input process. And I should note that when a project does fail, in most cases we're unable to reallocate that funding. So the money goes back and we're not able to use that on another project. So with all that said, I'm going to pass it back over to Susan, who's going to start to get into some of our draft changes to the evaluation criteria.
All right, so I'm going to walk you through an example of one of the scoring criteria that we'll revisit later on in this presentation. and I'm going to apply the scoring matrix that we've put together here. So just one more note on this. This is not final. What we're presenting to you is not the done deal. We're getting this out to you because we love your feedback on it. This is our starting point. So as we go forward, do note that this could change and that we may change it based on the feedback that you give us. Okay, so here we have sustainable design. And what we have here is the bold text at the top shows you the criteria. The bold sentence below it would be the definition of the criteria, and then the bullet points under that are what you might see in the application to guide you through the process. So for sustainable design, we define that criteria as the applicant has successfully demonstrated the integration of sustainable design features and practices. And the application guidance would be to explain any sustainable design planning completed for the proposed project, to describe design features that will result in reductions in energy, water, and material use compared to conventional park design, to include any coordination with city or regional sustainability plans that go beyond the park's boundaries, and to describe any special ecosystem services integrated into the site's design. What we have here is our proposed evaluation range, and you'll see that this is a scale that goes from poor to excellent. We do have some numbers associated with these that are just there for an example. We'll ask you in our online survey to tell us how many points you think should go to each one of these criteria that we're going through. But as you can see, if it was a 10-point criteria, maybe 0 to 2 would be poor and 9 to 10 would be excellent. So I'm going to bring you through our definition for excellent and down to poor. An excellent rating indicates that the section of the proposed project is compelling, consistently excellent in quality, and addresses all requirements, thereby showing the highest potential for success. In a sustainable design project, this might mean that the site design incorporates the natural features of the location. If it's in a rainy location, maybe there's some stormwater management integrated into the park design that is also used as a feature for recreation, and that we see how many gallons of water this is going to process, and it's done really well. We see that you've done all your homework. We know that this is a project that is doing what it should do, and it's credible and it's feasible, and you've done everything you need to demonstrate to that. A good project would indicate that the section of the proposed project is solid, good quality, and has good potential for success. So maybe this is a sustainability project that has some elements that are sustainable, but it's not the whole basis of the project, or maybe we just need a few more details on how that's going to be implemented. An average rating indicates that the section of the proposed project generally meets requirements for a reasonable chance of success. So, average. A fair rating indicates that the section of the proposed project is below standard, indicating that this element of the project may not succeed as described. If you were to put in that stormwater management system into West Texas, where you only get 2 inches of rain, we're going to realize that that's not going to be the sustainable approach that you should use for that region. If you mention in your narrative that you're going to use a sustainable technique, but that's not outlined anywhere else in the budget or the site plan, that is below standard. And a poor rating reflects that the section of the proposed project inconsistently or poorly responds to the requested criteria and has little to no potential for success as described. So if you do nothing sustainable, if you don't make an argument, if you do something that would be unsustainable and you're calling it sustainable, we're going to have an opportunity here to rate you on that. And so this range in general is designed to allow us to get into a little bit more nuance into the criteria that we're proposing. In our current criteria, sometimes we have sections that just trigger 1 or 2 points or trigger 10 points. And this is meant to kind of delve into that with a little more nuance and be a little bit more fair. So we're going to move into the scoring evaluation criteria. And the first criteria group is called excellence. And there's going to be 4 criteria within the excellence section. So for this one, it's excellence, goals, and objectives. The project proposal includes well-defined goals and objectives that support the TPWD mission, grantee objectives, and local priorities. And if you're following along on our survey, if you have that open, we are now essentially on question 17. So if you want to provide some comments on the goals and objectives, and as we go down, that's where we're tracking there. So the application guidance for goals and objectives is that we would ask you to list the goals and objectives of the projects. Goals should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely, SMART goals. And 2, to describe how the goals support the current TPWD Land and Water Resources Conservation and Recreation Plan, the Texas Outdoor Recreation Plan, and local park grant objectives, and your own local priorities. We do not currently score on this one here today. And I'm going to power through, but continue to ask questions and take your notes here. The second criteria we have under excellence is the project timeline and cost. And we define this as that the application proposes a project that is feasible and credible in terms of the acquisition and/or construction costs and timeline. In the application, we would ask you to describe your due diligence in terms of estimating project costs, include a timeline for project completion, and we would ask that your application materials should be consistent. The narrative, budget, timeline, and site plan should tell a clear, cohesive, and concise story. So this is asking you for something that we already do. We already ask that you give us a good project timeline and cost estimates. However, we do not score on this currently. So if the project timeline is bad or it doesn't seem feasible, or if it's good and you've done a really good job, we can't reward you for doing that. The next excellence criteria is site design, and that would be that the site design is well planned, clear, easy to read, and contains all of the information requested in the application. And we would give you application guidance as follows. Describe how the site design takes into consideration the character and special features of the site. That the site plan includes street names, acreage, and a true north arrow. That you clearly mark boundaries for existing parkland and acquisition tracts. That you clearly mark existing conditions, including utilities, easements, and special features. And that you clearly display which elements are included in the proposed project. This is another item that we already ask you for. We already ask you for a site design, and we tell you that you need these required elements. And but again, we don't provide scores for this currently. And just as another quick note here, we get site designs that are immaculate, that have been drawn by hand. This doesn't need to be a professional contracted service thing. It just does need to be clear, easy to read, and it needs to contain all the information requested in the application. All right, so we're moving on to innovation and uniqueness. And this would be that the project's innovation and uniqueness serves as an example for other Texas communities. And we would ask that you describe how the proposed project is forward-thinking, unique, and innovative. And so this criteria is taken directly from our public surveys that went out when we were redoing the TORP. And this is one that we're asking you for feedback on because, quite frankly, we don't know what you want to see in detail in this. This was a common survey theme. And so please provide us some feedback on that survey or in that text box about how you think this might reward good projects and how it might meet the needs of your community or not. And I'm going to pass this off to Aaron, who will take you through the integrity section. And we're on a question 25 if you're going down with the survey.
Yes, so please keep up with the survey. It's going to be really helpful for us after we do all of our public meetings, and then when we get back and really look into that, that's going to really help us do the evaluation of what we're proposing here. So please keep up with the survey and write your comments. We'd really like to see those. The next core value that we identified was integrity. And so we just want to make sure that applicants can demonstrate an understanding of the grant requirements and that they have the personnel and resources in place to manage the grant from inception to completion. And again, all these come from the survey responses we've had leading up to this, as well as some of the day-to-day operations that we see here in the office. So that's where some of these have come about, and so that's why we come up with integrity as a core value. But we really want people to describe the personnel and resources in place to manage the grant, include who will facilitate the acquisition or construction, progress reporting, and financial processes. Really, we just want to make sure that, there's a lot of steps when you are managing our grants. There's a lot of tasks to be completed, a lot of reporting to be done. So we just want to make sure that we have a relationship and we understand who's going to be at the organization that's going to be our day-to-day contact and how well they can help us manage the grant throughout the whole term. We're going to just ask you to describe each team member has the appropriate skill set and experience to successfully monitor and complete assigned tasks. So within integrity, one of the first ones one of the core next subject criteria was conflict of interest. Basically, applicant has considered real or perceived conflicts of interest with the project proposal. Identified conflicts have been adequately addressed. Explain how surrounding neighborhood businesses, special interest groups have been informed of the project and how concerns were heard and addressed. One of the main issues that we've seen is sometimes there are some folks that maybe are not supportive of a project, or there's some folks maybe on council or in leadership roles that maybe have different views on a certain project. And so during, we give out a grant, and then maybe during the administration of that, leadership changes roles, or maybe they go in a different direction. So we just want to kind of put this up front and try to understand what the support level and if there are any conflicts that we can get those addressed on the front side and not after we've already awarded a grant and are kind of administering that. But we also like to identify and describe any actual or potential conflicts of interest between employees and the project and how they have been resolved, and describe procedures in place to identify conflicts of interest. And again, this is all just proposals right now, so if y'all have comments, please put them on there so we can evaluate if this is necessary or if this is something that we really need to focus on and put some time and scoring into. So past performance, like Dan was saying, we do go out and do inspections. We do keep a log of past compliance, post-completion compliance issues. Basically, we want to make sure that if we do award you a grant, that the park is going to be well maintained and open and is going to be inviting for the public. So we keep a record of that, and we really don't have. We'd really want to be able to evaluate that in the application process. So basically, the applicant is in full compliance with previous funded and active TPW recreation grants. We identify the previous active grants received and certify that they are in compliance. Again, that comes from our post-completion inspections. And if they're not in compliance, we would just like y'all to give a narrative or at least explain how you're going to, an action plan basically on how you're going to become back into compliance, and reassure us in the future that maintenance and operation is going to be helped with it going forward. And if you've not had a grant with us before, maybe this is your first time applying, you can also give us a narrative or explain to us how you're going to maintain that in the future. And we also have another, that's where operations and maintenance kind of comes in with that as well. We, again, really want to see that you have thought out the process. Everybody gets excited. We love putting out new parks and building parks, but we want to make sure they're maintained into the future. So for this scoring subject, we really like to see if the applicant has demonstrated the ability to maintain the park and facilities into the future by providing a clear plan and available resources. So how we do that is we'd like you to describe how future operation and maintenance will be funded and who will be responsible for maintaining the park in the future. Explain what maintenance actions will be taken and how often maintenance services will be provided. and provide any existing operation agreements, include the estimate lifespan of each proposed facility. Now, we already have y'all, for a grant, we have you sign the certifications and assurances, and it, that outlines that you are going to maintain the park into the future, and that's the signed agreement that y'all put when y'all apply. But this just gives us a chance to understand a little bit more what your operations are. And with different facilities, different levels of maintenance is going to be required for different types of parks. And so we just want to make sure you've had a time to think that out and show us that you've planned for that. Okay. We are now moving over into the core value of service. So with service, we would really like to look at the community need. This is really coming down into parks and recreation master plans. Right now, you submit master plans to us, showing that you have gone through the public input process. But one of the concerns that we've had on our side, we see a lot of times that some master plans could be rushed. They could be, don't have as much public input as we would like to see. But some of them have really great public input and have really taken the time to truly plan and have come together with some really demonstrate a lot of good community need. And so with this whole range and this scoring criteria, we like to be able to show that and reward points where good work in planning has been done. But so to go through the community need, how we'll be scoring that is we just like to see that the project you described, the needs assessment process used for the project, and explain how community needs influence the site design. Also, we'd like to see you include if you have TBWD accepted Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Provide details on the public input process, including the timing, methods, results, and then describe other methods of the needs assessment, such as staff recommendations or threat of a lost opportunity. Another thing is we have public input, you have your priorities, but there are some situations where maybe some of the input that you receive isn't what the community can support, like the city or county, or you just cannot provide some of those resources. Say a swimming pool over a splash pad and operations and maintenance and just utilities alone. So there's sometimes public input you're just not able to provide exactly what you receive back, but we would give you an opportunity to justify that in this community needs of what you can provide and what the input you received. Geographic distribution. The project will improve the geographic distribution of parkland and facilities within the applicant's jurisdiction and the project service area. So yes, define and explain your jurisdiction in the project service area. Identify if this is the first park and or fills a critical parks and recreation gap as identified through research, public input, and other means. And then upload documentation to support this claim, such as a map that shows the distribution of parks and a comprehensive inventory of recreation facilities. So we ask you to do that now, and if we currently have points for a first park or a new park, but also if you've had parks and you have planning jurisdictions, you've broken up your city or county into multiple areas, this will give you a chance to identify that, again, that level of service you're trying to provide for your public and how you're distributing your parks throughout your communities. Underserved populations. The proposed project increases opportunity and improves access to parks and recreation facilities for underserved populations. Identify and define underserved populations within the project service area and within the jurisdiction. Describe how the project will increase and improve access to parks and recreation facilities for these underserved populations. In the application process now, we do ask for percent of minorities and low income in your communities based off the 2010 census. We'll still be evaluating on those criteria, but this will allow you to explain even more. Maybe you've done some of your own surveys or found this give you a chance to maybe define some of your underserved populations in your communities and make a justification for that in your application. So that'll help us range and give us allow you to earn points for providing recreation for what you consider underserved populations, as well as what we consider parks and wildlife underserved populations. So hopefully that'll give you a chance to learn a little bit more about your communities during that public input process. Accessibility, the project or the proposed project will fulfill or exceed state and federal accessibility requirements. Describe how the proposed project fulfills or exceeds state and federal accessibility requirements. Include if the project incorporates universal design, and then identify any special needs populations of significance in the area and how this project was designed with those in mind. So if you've had experience with our applications before, you know we do have a question on how this meets or exceeds the standards. And right now there's just a couple points for that. And if the real thing is we have some folks that really go above and beyond. They do incorporate universal design, all-inclusive playgrounds or zero entry swimming pools that take up a substantial amount of the budget, and it's a big part of the project. And so right now we'd like to give that range just so we can give some points where, if you're really going above and beyond and really trying to incorporate those universal design methods. All right, we're going over into stewardship now. I'm going to pass it over to Dan. He's going to go through stewardship and explain some of that for you guys.
Thanks, Aaron. So we're moving along pretty quickly this morning. We're at about 9:45 right now, so we're pretty far ahead of schedule. So I would certainly, we've had a few questions that have been typed in so far, but I would certainly encourage all of you that are on, if anything, if you want to make a comment about something or ask a question about something, we're going to have pretty ample time to address your questions. So by all means, don't be shy. Please use the chat feature if you'd like. So getting into stewardship, the first item I'll discuss is a description of the environment. And this is something that does appear on the current scoring criteria for all 5 of our programs. However, there really aren't scoring opportunities for this information. We feel this is important information to be provided and is actually required for federal funding. So what we would be looking for here is that you as the applicants have thoroughly researched the property for your proposed park improvements. Whether it be through a development project, maybe a renovation project, or even acquisition. We would want you to research the property. We would want you to identify any potential negative environmental impacts that could be a result from your proposed park development. And then importantly, we would also want you to identify any potential mitigation strategies required if there were negative impacts. So identify those mitigation strategies and create a plan moving forward for addressing those strategies. As I mentioned, currently we do dedicate a pretty big portion of the current applications to a description of the environment. But what we're proposing here is awarding points for providing a more thorough description and identification of mitigation strategies. And I should mention that this would include both environmental and cultural natural resources. So there could even potentially be more points available if you've already had an environmental assessment done, or maybe you've already had a cultural resources survey performed. So again, if anyone has any input on this, please let us know either through the chat feature or through your online survey. Conservation is also a big part of the active evaluation criteria. There are some points available here currently, but we would love your input on, should it be worth more points? Is this important to you? Is this not important to you? What we would be looking for here is that the proposed project actively protects or restores critical ecosystems and ecologically sensitive areas. So similar to the description of the environment, we would want to see that you've performed adequate research on the property. You described any critical or sensitive areas. And again, you've explained how these resources could be protected, how they're being avoided, or even how they're being mitigated, if that applies. Sustainable design is also part of the current evaluation criteria. As Susan mentioned a little earlier in the presentation, this is something that we're currently scoring on a range with the current criteria, and projects are scored relative to the current applicant pool for that active grant cycle. And I've mentioned the TORP, the Texas Outdoor Recreation Plan, a few times. And I should mention also that Chapter 6 of the TORP deals with sustainable park design. This chapter includes some really good and useful information. Also includes a sustainable park design checklist. So if you're not familiar with the TORP, not familiar with Chapter 6, I would certainly recommend that you take a look at that. That's some really good, useful information there. So with sustainable design criteria, we would be looking to see that the applicant has successfully demonstrated the integration of sustainable design features and practices. A lot of common proposals that we'll see here can include the use of solar lighting, drip irrigation, xerophytic plant materials, the use of recycled materials. Those are all pretty common things that we see and we certainly encourage. So the guidance here would be within the application, you would provide a thorough explanation of your sustainable designing planning techniques, materials used, describe design features that will result in reductions in energy, water, and material use when compared to conventional methods. And one thing that we're proposing here that's a little different than the current criteria is that you would include any coordination with city or regional sustainability plans that would extend beyond the park boundaries. So currently, we really only focus on any sustainable techniques or planning methods used within the park boundary. But we're looking to expand that. Perhaps your park is part of a larger citywide recycling effort. Maybe you're connected to a larger municipal gray water source for irrigation. So we have seen this come in applications in the past. So we are proposing that we're kind of looking beyond just the park boundaries here. And then you would describe any special ecosystem services integrated into the site's design. So again, we're looking for design elements, low impact design, bioswales, that type of thing. So it could be planning methods in addition to material usage. So the last item that I'll discuss within the stewardship core value is awareness. The proposed project incorporates elements that cultivate support for and awareness of the conservation of natural and cultural resources. So first and foremost, what we would be looking for here is that, again, you've provided adequate research into the site where your proposed park is going to be taking place, and you're identifying any natural and cultural resources that are available on the site. We would want to see how the project is cultivating support for and awareness of these resources. Describe in detail how this would directly benefit the local area and the residents. So again, if anyone has any thoughts on any of the stewardship criteria that I'm explaining, please utilize your chat feature or include those comments on your online survey. And the last of the 5 core values that I'll discuss this morning is teamwork. So one of the proposed criteria here with regards to teamwork would be coordination with subject matter experts or SMEs. So we would be looking at you potentially contacting SMEs and consulting them regarding the acquisition, planning, and design of the project. An SME could be an outside resource, could be a design consultant, could be an environmental consultant, perhaps someone familiar with cultural resources. It can also be a Texas Parks and Wildlife regional biologist. There's some pretty good information on the TPWD website regarding regional biologists. If you are contacting a regional biologist, we do ask that you give them adequate time to review your proposal on the site. So maybe 60 days advance notice on that. Free resources for SMEs could include maybe a master naturalist, maybe you've got a university or a high school with a biology department nearby that could potentially be a resource and considered as an SME. We would want you to identify best practices considered and included in the project. We would also want you to identify all state and federal laws regarding the proposed project scope. And again, similar to many of the stewardship criteria, we would want you to describe a plan of action for compliance there. Okay, I'll talk a little about internal support. Applicant demonstrates internal support for the project at all levels of the organization. And again, something that we'll certainly, we are aware of and would take into consideration is that all cities are different in terms of size. Perhaps you've only got 1 or 2 employees for a small community. Maybe you're a large non-urban or urban entity and you've got multiple departments. You've got parks and public works. So it's important to note here that a small community wouldn't be penalized for a smaller staff. So with internal support, we would want you to submit a current and certified resolution that includes all of the requirements listed in the application. And this is part of our current scoring criteria. But one thing we currently don't ask for and don't score on would be letters of support or other documentation to show organizational support for the proposed project. Again, this could be a letter from your public works group. Maybe you're illustrating coordination between your grants writer and your park staff. Again, not all city staffs are apples to apples. Frequently for a small community application, we'll see where one individual is kind of spearheading the entire application process, which is great. Sometimes it can be a city manager, maybe a mayor. But one thing a letter of support from other internal organizations would ensure is that maybe that one individual that's spearheading the application is an elected official and they're not reelected, and then we're running into a bit of an issue because the rest of the staff is unfamiliar with the project or maybe wasn't really supporting it in the first place. So again, if anyone has any thoughts on internal support, please let us know. So on the flip side of that would be external support or outside partnerships. And this would be where your project involves the contribution of resources from sources other than the applicant. Frequently we'll get letters of support from the community within a grant application, which is great. We love to see those and love to see that the project is supported by the community. However, we don't have any current scoring criteria related to that. We do get letters from legislators on occasion, and again, we think that's fantastic. But again, no scoring criteria associated with that. With external support, the guidance would be that you're identifying all contributions of resources from outside partners. Again, this could be community support, it could be professional support. We would look for you to include current and signed letters of commitment. This can be financial or non-financial commitments. And these would include detailed information regarding what is being contributed, the value of the contribution, and how this value was determined. And again, this can be financial or non-financial. And then we would want you to provide us with a description of any history of successful partnerships similar to the project scope. So have you undertaken projects similar to this? Do you have a history of outside support, successful history with these same partnerships that's occurred in the past? And then the last criteria that I'll discuss regarding teamwork deals with health, safety, and economic development. Your project supports community initiatives regarding health, safety, and economic development or related areas. We all know that projects that make money are always great, but again, that's not always the case. So we currently don't have any scoring criteria related to health, safety, and economic development. So what we would be asking for here, sorry about that.
I need a sound sample though.
What we would be asking for here is that you're providing a description of how your project supports community initiatives, and this would be involving health, safety, and economic development or related areas. Please let us know if you have feedback regarding this proposed criteria. And with that said, we've kind of made it through our draft evaluation and criteria changes. As I've mentioned before, today's webinar is part of a larger ongoing public input process. So far, we've already had 4 public meetings. We've had one here in Austin. We've been to Houston, El Paso, and Brownsville. And the next week, we'll be having our last 2 public meetings in Fort Worth and in Tyler. We'll also be giving an abbreviated presentation in a couple of weeks in Rockfall for the TRAPS North Regional Conference. And then, as most of you may or may not know, we currently have a Local Parks annual deadline of October 1st. So we're getting pretty close to a deadline now. I think next Monday is the deadline. So none of the things that we're discussing here are going to be applicable for that October 1 deadline. We'll be using our current scoring criteria for that. So the time frame moving forward with these proposed changes would be we would gather public input throughout this process, and then based on the presentation today and based on your public input, we would be going to the Texas Parks and Wildlife Commissioners in January of 19 and requesting permission to post these changes in the Texas Register. This would give you a 30-day open period for public comment. Assuming all goes well at that point, we would be returning to the commissioners in May of 19 for rule adoption. And in between that January and May commission meeting date, we would also, several of us will be in El Paso again in February of next year for the TRAPS annual expo. And again, that really we'll be gathering public input, but hopefully by that time we've got the majority of these changes ironed out. So with that said, we're pretty much at the end of today's webinar. Again, we're well ahead of schedule. So we'll keep things open for a few minutes here and for up to an hour if we need to. But if anyone has any comments, by all means, please feel free to use the chat feature. And again, we've got adequate time to address any questions or comments you may have. So we have had a few questions that have been asked earlier in the presentation. So what we can do is summarize those previously asked questions and provide our responses to those questions as well. And I'm going to let Susan handle this, since she's been responding to the questions.
So out of the questions we've seen so far, we got a question about basic eligibility. Can other TPWD count as match for these grants? The answer to that is that our recreational trails grants can be used as match if the timing works out on both of those. Someone asked, when dealing with a MUD, is it the population of the district itself that you would use to determine what grant program you're eligible for? And so yes, it would be the population of the district. And oftentimes we see those districts are eligible for either small community or non-urban funds. Again, if you're a small community, you can apply for non-urban. If you're non-urban, you cannot apply for small community. We try to preserve the small communities together. We got a question about the survey. You cannot save the survey and come back to it later. You gotta go through the end and submit it. We had a question about the TORP. That's the Texas Outdoor Recreation Plan, and in the chat box you should have a link to it. That's also available on the resources tab of our Recreation Grants online portal. We had a question about the awareness and cultural resources question, and it asked if that would mean that now historical items would be eligible for grant funds. The answer to that is basically no. We're not changing, we can't change the big fundamentals of how the grant program works, but we would be able to give you points for say interpretive signage or other ways of incorporating the identity of the place or the context into your park design. We got a question about what scoring criteria are we going to use for grants that are submitted on October 1st, and that is not what you saw today. That is the current scoring criteria. The earliest we could possibly be using these new proposed criteria would be in October 2019. So we're not switching anything out on you yet. And there's a few more questions that have popped up here. I may have missed it, but is there still scoring for using all or most funds for recreational features rather than infrastructure? And this is one thing that we anticipate will change. As part of our surveying process, we learned that people really need restrooms, and restrooms are really expensive. And right now, our scoring criteria makes it hard to get those in with our dollars, for instance. So we're trying to, part of the reason for changing this criteria is to incorporate more community need, have you guys tell us what you need in your community, and we don't want to be directing the direct recreational facilities that you choose. Explain the use of Texas Recreational Trails grants as much that you just answered. We can get Dana, our director, yeah. We'll get you some more details here.
Okay. Can they hear me?
Yeah.
Hello, it's Dana, and I'll give you a brief overview of how that works. Basically, you would have to apply for the Trails grant first, and that has a February 1st deadline. Once awarded, and it does have to be awarded, then you can use the Trails grant as match for a local park grant. So then you would need to apply for the October 1st deadline for the local park grant, and you can use it. Let's say it's $200,000. So if the $200,000 grant from the Trails grant is used as match in the local park grant, the trail cannot be constructed until you receive the local park grant as well. So if it is a little bit of a timing issue where once you get the Trails grant, you'll have to hold off on construction until you also get the local park grants in order to use it as match. And that can be, and we have done it in the past, but it can also be, it can really hold up a project. So it's not always the best option for everyone. Does that make sense? Or does anybody have additional questions on that? Where's that?
It was the most recent one.
Okay.
I guess we can give you some guiding questions to think about as you're completing your survey. And we want to make sure that these criteria are reflecting what works for you. Obviously, the stewardship core value is part of our programmatic mission, but we have some other ways where this is representing a change. And yeah, oh, we have another question here. Does this mean we cannot go into the design of a rec trails grant before the award of a parks grant? You could design the trails, but you cannot start construction. We can't reimburse for things that have already been constructed across the board, and that cannot change with this new scoring criteria. New question, will any funds be available in the future to help fund park plans? I've been talking a lot, so do you want to answer this?
So is that specific to master plans? Is that the question?
Yeah. Yes.
So currently the local park program only provides grants for construction projects. We do allow professional services, but again, that's not really for planning, jurisdictional planning or regional planning. That's more for design or surveys specific to that park project. So construction only. No plans for changing that. You're welcome. Do you have any other questions?
Yeah. Does anyone have any concerns about what we just put forward? Is there anything that when you go back to your teams today, if they ask, what did you learn in the parks webinar? Are you going to have to be breaking some news gently to them? You know, is there anything that you're anticipating might be a big change for you that you'd like us to know about? We wait to see if anyone types anything into the box.
Well, if something crosses your mind later, again, all of our contact information is with the presentation. If you go to our website, all of our contact information can be found there. So feel free to send us an email if you'd prefer to do it that way. The online survey is also a great opportunity to provide your feedback to us. So it doesn't look like we have any additional questions coming in. So with that said, I guess we'll go ahead and end today's webinar. Thanks to everyone who participated. And again, we really value your feedback. So please complete the survey or let us know your thoughts. Thank you.